Sergeant at Arms. The third session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay will lead the chamber in prayer.
Panginoon, nagpapasalamat po kami sa oportunidad na maging inyong instrumento para sa pagbabagong inaasam ng buong sambayanan. Naway magsimula po sa aming mga halal na pinuno ng bansa ang pag-unawa, pagmamahal at pagkakaisa na kinakailangan upang maisakatuparan ang inyong plano para sa aming bayan. Kami po ay dumudulog sa inyo na bigyan kami ng lakas para sa bawat hakbang na tatahakin na ikauunlad ng bayang sabik na makaatim ng kapayapaan at kaunlaran. Gabayan po sana ninyo kaming mga lingkod bayan sa pagsisimula ng aming paglalakbay tungo sa minimithing tunay na pagbabago. Ang lahat ng ito'y idinadalangin namin sa inyo, Panginoon. Siya nawa.
Amen. Salamat po, Senator Binay. The Cabanatuan Christian Church Choir will lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, and the group will also render a song entitled Tagumpay Nating Lahat.
Bayang magiliw, perlas na silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, luyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mo'y bukaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isagang watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdinigning, ang bituin at araw na kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng buwan, ating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Maraming salamat po sa Kabanatuan Christian Church Choir. Secretary, may you please call the roll?
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Hunasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 22 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the second session, Tuesday, July 26, 2016, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, before I move for the reference of business, may I just acknowledge the birthday of Senator Cynthia Villar last Friday, July 29. So we wish Senator Cynthia Villar a very happy birthday.
I join the senators in greeting our colleague, Senator Cynthia Villar, a happy birthday. So can we have Majority Leader? Can we have a
1 minute suspension to be able to greet the distinguished lady?
Suspension for 1 minute.
Daming additional dito. Meron?
Reference of business, tapos yung continuation, yung mga ulitin. Meron. Before the continuing, after the reference. Meron si Risa.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge the presence in the gallery of various groups visiting the Senate. This is from the office of Senator Ontiveros. The National Anti-Poverty Commission Sectoral Council members and representatives headed by the Vice Chairperson for the Basic Sector, Mr. Roberto Alerosa, member from Housing Cooperatives of Kilos Maralita, members and affiliates of Akbayan Citizens Action Party, members of ARIA Progresivo, headed by its Secretary General Edmund Ladrito, and representative from the Philippine Center for Population and Development, Mr. President. I'd like to welcome them to the Senate.
Welcome to the Senate, all the guests of Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Senate Bill number 101, an act removing the restrictions under sections 118, 119, 121, 122, and 123 of the Commonwealth Act number 141 as amended on free patents issued under section 44 thereof, introduced by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
Refer this to the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources.
102, an act increasing the number of rays of the sun on the Philippine flag from 8 to 9, amending for this purpose Republic Act number 8491, otherwise known as the Flag and Heraldic Code of the Philippines, by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture.
103, an act creating the Mindanao Railway Corporation to establish the Mindanao Railway System, authorizing the issuance of bonds and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
104, an act requiring all government-issued certificates, licenses, and identification cards to provide the correct blood type of the person therein and providing a penalty for violation thereof by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
105, an act requiring the registration of subscriber identity module SIM cards in mobile phones, introduced by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committees on Public Services and Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
106, an act punishing the willful failure to pay child support by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
107, an act repealing the estate tax under Republic Act Number 8424 or the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, introduced by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
108, entitled An Act Declaring April 27 of every year as a special working public holiday throughout the country to commemorate the victory of Lapu-Lapu and his men over the Spaniards, led by Ferdinand Magellan in the historic Battle of Mactan on April 27, 1521, to be known as Lapu-Lapu Day or Adlaw ni Lapu-Lapu, introduced by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committee on Education, Arts, and Culture.
109, an act amending Section 10 of Republic Act 8239, otherwise known as the Philippine Passport Act of 1996 and for other purposes, by Senator Richard J. Gordon.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations.
110, an act providing for the share in the national taxes of the local government units, amending for this purpose Republic Act Number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
111, an act providing a framework for the right to adequate food, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
112, an act creating the Mindanao Railways Corporation, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operation, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
113, an act establishing the National Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the National Preventive Mechanism Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment in the Philippines, providing a framework for implementing obligations under the optional protocol to the United Nations Convention against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
114, an act abolishing the Road Board created by virtue of Republic Act Number 8794 and transferring its powers and functions to the Department of Public Works and Highways and to the Department of Transportation and Communications, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 8794, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Public Works and Public Services.
115, an act amending Section 2 of the Republic Act Number 1405, as amended, otherwise known as the Law on Secrecy of Bank Deposits, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
116, an act amending Section 53B of Republic Act Number 9184, otherwise known as an act providing for the modernization, standardization, and regulation of the procurement activities of the government and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Finance.
117, an act strengthening the prohibition against labor-only contracting, amending for this purpose Presidential Decree Number 442, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines, as amended, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
118, an act amending Article 365 of Act Number 3815, as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Public Services.
119, an act to regulate the practice of professional building officials in the Philippines, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Pimentel III.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
120, an act creating the Mindanao Railways Authority, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, amending for this purpose Republic Act Number 4156, entitled An Act Creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operation as amended by Republic Act Number 6366, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
121, an act amending Section 24A2 of Republic Act Number 8424, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997, as amended and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
122, an act abolishing the irrigation service fees and such other similar or related fees from beneficiaries of irrigation systems funded and constructed by or under the administration of the National Irrigation Administration, amending for the purpose certain sections of Republic Act Number 3601, Presidential Decree Number 552, and Presidential Decree Number 1702, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
123, an act providing for free meals for students of the public education system, particularly school children from kindergarten to junior high school, following the K-12 policy, providing framework for its implementation, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Health and Demography, and Finance.
124, an act increasing allowable personal and additional exemptions of individual taxpayers, amending for the purpose Section 35A and B of Republic Act Number 8424, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended and for other purposes, by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
125, an act reducing the corporate income tax rate, amending sections 27 and 28 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended and for other purposes, by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
126, an act classifying the sale or importation of petroleum products and raw materials in the manufacture thereof as value-added tax-exempt transactions, amending for the purpose Section 109(1) of Republic Act Number 8424, otherwise known as the Tax Reform Act of 1997, as amended by Republic Act Number 9337 and for other purposes, by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Ways and Means and Energy.
127, an act restoring and rehabilitating the existing lines of the Philippine National Railways, extending further the southern line to Matnog, Sorsogon, and establishing the railway extension line from Calamba City to Batangas City, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 4156, entitled An Act Creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operation as amended by Republic Act number 6366, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises, Public Services, and Finance.
128, an act constituting a constitutional convention to amend the 1987 Philippine Constitution, defining qualifications for its delegates, who shall be elected simultaneously with the October 2016 barangay elections, appropriating funds for its operations and for other purposes by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes, Electoral Reforms, and People's Participation.
129, an act amending Section 24 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 is amended and for other purposes by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
130, an act amending Section 24 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended and for other purposes by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
131, an act providing for tax deductions for family requirements, including payments for tertiary education, tuition, and allied expenses, as well as interest payments for the first home mortgage, amending for the purpose Section 34 of the National Internal Revenue Code of the Philippines as amended by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
132, an act amending Section 3 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, establishing a taxpayer assistance service in the Bureau of Internal Revenue and for other purposes by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
133, an act establishing a mechanism to enable poor Filipino families to have at least one college graduate by institutionalizing the expanded Student Grants in Aid program for poverty alleviation and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
134, an act granting discounts on basic and education services to underprivileged students in all levels, including those enrolled in technical vocational institutions by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Ways and Means.
135, an act upgrading the minimum salary grade level of teachers from salary grade 11 to 19 by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
136, an act to protect Filipino mothers and children from malnutrition by establishing a maternal and child health care program, appropriating funds for the purpose by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Women, Children, Family Relations and Gender Equality, and Finance.
137, an act creating the Mindanao Railways Corporation, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operation by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations and Public Enterprises, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
138, an act providing for a Magna Carta for the Philippine National Police by Senator Sani Angara.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Finance.
139, an act declaring the coconut levy assets as a trust fund, providing for its management and utilization, authorizing the privatization and management office to dispose the coconut levy assets and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
140, an act providing for free irrigation services to farmers, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 3610 as amended and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
141, an act mandating the Department of Agriculture to promote urban agricultural development in the country's metropolitan areas to address food security and providing funds therefore by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Ways and Means, and Finance.
142, an act merging the Philippine Carabao Center and the National Dairy Authority into the Philippine National Dairy Development Agency to provide greater focus on the accelerated development of the dairy industry and to increase production of dairy animals in the Philippines, providing a ruminant development and therefore and for other purposes. Introduced by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Ways and Means, and Finance.
143, an act establishing the National Crop Protection Program, creating the Philippine Crop Protection Agency by consolidating the disparate crop protection, quarantine and pest management efforts, activities and agencies into a holistic and integrated service to promote the sustainability and greater productivity of the Philippine agriculture sector and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
144, an act promoting the scientific propagation, processing, utilization, and development of Philippine native animals, hereby creating the Philippine Native Animal Development Center by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
145, an act mandating a 2,000 peso across-the-board increase in the monthly pension with corresponding adjustment of the minimum monthly pension under the Social Security System, amending for this purpose Section 12 of Republic Act number 1161 as amended, otherwise known as the Social Security Act of 1997 by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
146, an act creating the Department of Migration and Development, defining its powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Foreign Relations, and Finance.
147, an act adjusting the income brackets and rates of tax imposed on taxable income of individuals, amending for this purpose Section 24 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
148, an act establishing the Las Piñas, Parañaque Critical Habitat and Ecotourism Area as a wetland, ensuring the protection thereof, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Cynthia Villar.
To the Committees on Environment and Natural Resources, Tourism, and Finance.
149, an act to strengthen the right of citizens to information held by the government by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media and Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation.
150, an act increasing pensions under the Social Security System, amending for the purpose Section 12 of Republic Act Number 1161, otherwise known as the Social Security Act of 1997, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises, and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
Additional reference of business bills on first reading. Senate Bill Number 151, an act amending Section 24 and 35 of National Internal Revenue Code of 1987 as amended, and for other purposes, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
152, an act promoting the revitalization, rehabilitation, and modernization of the Philippine National Railways, amending for the purpose certain provisions of RA 4156, entitled An Act Creating the Philippine National Railways, prescribing its powers, functions, and duties, and providing for the necessary funds for its operation, by Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
153, an act defining the crime of robbery of train implements, classifying the act as heinous crime, and imposing penalty thereof, by Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
154, an act granting the President of the Philippines special powers, prescribing urgent and related measures necessary and proper to effectively address the crisis in the transportation sector, and for other purposes, by Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Public Services, Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes, and Finance.
155, an act to promote the protection, conservation, and rehabilitation of watersheds, supporting the national irrigation systems to guarantee continuing supply of water for agricultural production and to increase the productivity of farmers to sustain food self-sufficiency, and providing the funding thereof, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Public Works, Environment and Natural Resources, Ways and Means, and Finance.
156, an act amending Republic Act Number 9136, otherwise known as the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001, and for other purposes, by Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Energy and Public Services.
157, an act expanding the use of the Legal Assistance Fund, amending for the purpose Section 26 of Republic Act Number 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995, as amended, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Foreign Relations, and Finance.
158, an act providing for a full tuition subsidy for students enrolled in state universities and colleges, and appropriating funds therefore, by Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
159, an act implementing the people's right to information on the constitutional policies of full public disclosure and honesty in the public service, and for other purposes, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
160, an act instituting a free Nutri-Meals program to children enrolled in all elementary schools, including kindergarten and high schools in the K-12 public education sector, providing framework for its meaningful implementation, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Health and Demography, Ways and Means, and Finance.
161, an act to protect Filipino mothers and children from malnutrition by establishing a maternal and child health care program and appropriating funds there for the purpose, by Senator Poe.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, and Finance.
162, an act to promote cost-effective measures for transport sector and commuting public, providing for the creation of a National Transportation Safety Board, prescribing its powers and functions, and appropriating funds therefore, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, Public Services, and Finance.
163, an act prohibiting discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, race, religion, or belief, sex or gender, or sexual orientation, language, disability, educational attainment, and other forms of discrimination, and providing penalties for the purpose, by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Cultural Communities, Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development, and Finance.
164, an act establishing a framework for film and television tourism in the Philippines, marketing the industry globally, and providing employment for the sector and for other purposes by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media, Tourism, Ways and Means, and Finance.
165, an act supporting the production of Philippine independent films by providing incentives to filmmakers who are given honors in notable international film competitions by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media, Ways and Means, and Finance.
166, an act to improve and to promote quality delivery of health services in barangays, enacting the Barangay Health Workers and Services Reform Act of 2016 by Senator Poe.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government, and Finance.
167, an act establishing a credit assistance program for overseas Filipino workers by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, and Finance.
168, an act for the protection, conservation, and rehabilitation of watersheds, supporting the national irrigation systems to ensure continuous supply of water for agricultural production, self-sufficiency in food, and providing funds for the purpose by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Public Works, Environment and Natural Resources, Ways and Means, and Finance.
169, an act establishing a simplified tax regime for small businesses, and for this purpose amending certain provisions of the National Internal Revenue Code by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Ways and Means, and Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship.
170, an act amending Section 9 of Republic Act Number 10533, an act enhancing the Philippine education system by strengthening its curriculum and increasing the number of years for basic education, appropriating funds thereof and for other purposes, otherwise known as the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 by Senator Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
171, an act promoting open access and data transmission, providing additional powers to the National Telecommunications Commission for other purposes by Senator Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Public Services and Science and Technology.
172, an act institutionalizing the Abot Alam program by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, Youth, and Finance.
173, an act institutionalizing a full subsidy program, state universities for children of public school teachers, providing funds thereof and for other purposes by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
174, an act professionalizing the contracting and subcontracting industry, requiring a transition of support program and prohibiting oppressive practices, amending for the purpose Articles 106 to 109 of PD 442, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines, as amended by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
175, an act creating the Innovation Council and providing benefits and programs to strengthen, promote, and develop the Philippine startup ecosystem by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Science and Technology, Ways and Means, and Finance.
176, an act institutionalizing the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship present program and promoting social enterprises to the poor as primary stakeholders by Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development, and Finance.
177, an act providing for a full tuition fee subsidy for students enrolled in state universities and colleges and appropriating funds thereof, Senator Paulo Benigno Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
178, an act providing for the regulation and supervision of payment system by Senator Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
179, an act amending Section 24 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended and for other purposes by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
180, an act amending Republic Act Number 9262, defining electronic violence against women or EVAW, providing protective measures and providing penalties therefore and for other purposes by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, and Science and Technology.
181, an act increasing pensions and other benefits under the Social Security system, amending for the purpose Section 12 of Republic Act Number 1161 as amended, otherwise known as the Social Security Law by Senator Binay.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises, and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
182, an act providing for the regularization of punong barangay, sangguniang barangay members, sangguniang kabataan, chairman, barangay secretary, and barangay treasurer by Senator Nancy S. Binay.
To the Committees on Local Government and Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation.
183, an act granting incentives to public school teachers in all levels, including state universities and colleges and for other purposes, by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Ways and Means.
184, an act mandating the establishment of a program of education designed to help all members of the community of an educational institution to avoid involvement with illegal drugs, by Senator Nancy S. Binay.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
185, an act to impose the death penalty and increase penalties on certain heinous crimes involving dangerous drugs, amending for the purpose other special penal laws and for other purposes, by Senator Emmanuel B. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
186, an act to impose the death penalty of the heinous crime of kidnapping, amending for that purpose the revised penal laws as amended and for other purposes, by Senator Emmanuel B. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
187, an act to impose the death penalty of the heinous crime of aggravated rape, amending for that purpose the revised penal laws as amended and for other purposes, by Senator Emmanuel Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
188, an act providing for the establishment of a community fitness center in every barangay nationwide and appropriating funds therefor, by Senator Emmanuel B. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Local Government, and Finance.
189, an act providing for the restoration of mandatory military training for all grade 11 and grade 12 students by reinstating sections 38 and 39 of Republic Act number 7077, otherwise known as the Citizen Armed Force or Armed Forces of the Philippines Reservist Act, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and National Defense and Security.
190, an act establishing the wireless internet access program in all state universities and colleges in the country and appropriating funds therefor, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Science and Technology, Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
191, an act creating the Philippine Boxing Commission, thereby strengthening the country's standing in boxing sports, ensuring the welfare of Filipino boxers and providing funds therefor, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Games, Amusement and Sports, Health and Demography, and Finance.
192, an act mandating the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, POEA, to publish, disseminate, and update a handbook on the rights and responsibilities of migrant workers, amending for the purpose RA 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995, as amended, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Foreign Relations, and Finance.
193, an act increasing the composition of barangay officials, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7160, otherwise known as Local Government Code of 1991, as amended, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committee on Local Government.
194, an act granting maternity leave benefits equivalent to 180 days or 6 months to all women workers in the government and private sectors, by Senator Emmanuel D. Pacquiao.
To the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
195, an act defining criminal exploitation of children and increasing penalties for all crimes involving them and for other purposes, by Senator Laila M. De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights, and Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
196, an act amending Republic Act number 1405, also known as the Bank Secrecy Law, as amended, by removing from its coverage government officials and employees and for other purposes, by Senator Laila M. De Lima.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
197, an act to abolish the penalty of imprisonment in libel cases, to make any discussion of any matter of public concern or criticism of official conduct privilege, and to properly determine the venue of cases and persons responsible for libel, amending for the purpose Articles 354, 355, 357, 360, 361 of Act number 2815, as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, in Section 4, Paragraph C4, Chapter 2 of Republic Act number 10175, otherwise known as Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012, and for other purposes, by Senator Laila M. De Lima.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Public Information and Mass Media.
198, an act providing for full tuition subsidy in state universities and colleges and appropriating funds therefore by Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and Finance.
199, an act prohibiting hazing and regulating other forms of initiation rights of fraternities, sororities, and other organizations and providing penalties for violation thereof, repealing for the purpose Republic Act Number 8049 by Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights.
200, an act to reinstitutionalize the mandatory military and civic reserve officers training corps for students in all colleges, universities, and technical or vocational schools by Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and National Defense and Security.
Second additional reference to business. PS Resolution Number 19 entitled Directing the Appropriate Senate Committees to Conduct an Inquiry in Aid of Legislation on Effective Drug Prevention and Intervention for the Youth by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Youth.
20, a resolution directing the Committee on Education to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of implementation of the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture.
21, a resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the implementation of the BMBA Act of 2002 in support of micro-enterprises in the Philippines by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship, Local Government and Ways and Means.
22, directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the livelihood and enterprise development programs of government agencies for the purpose of enabling closer coordination and convergence towards more effective service and support for the Philippine enterprises by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship and Local Government.
23, directing the Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on government plans and strategies to promote ease of doing business in the country by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
24, directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on government programs to promote access to responsive financing for micro, small, and medium enterprises by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship and Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies.
25, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the state of e-commerce adoption in the Philippines and the implementation of the Philippine e-commerce roadmap by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship and Science and Technology.
26, directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the increase of youth unemployment and the need to create employment opportunities and formulate programs to address the needs of young Filipinos, including the unemployed youth, workers in vulnerable employment, and young entrepreneurs by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
The Committees on Youth and Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development.
27, directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the implementation of the Sangguniang Kabataan Reform Act of 2015 and planning for the conduct of Sangguniang Kabataan elections this year by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
28, a resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of e-government services by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committee on Science and Technology.
29, directing the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the education of youth regarding the martial law period and human rights abuses under Marcos regime, with the end view of preserving memory through historical truth-telling, protecting our democracy, and promoting a sense of justice and human rights among young Filipinos by Senator Bam Aquino IV.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture and Youth.
30, resolution urging the Secretary of Finance and Commissioner of Internal Revenue to adjust anew the threshold amounts provided under Section 109(1)P, Q, and W of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended as mandatorily required by the said law by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Ways and Means and Finance.
31, a resolution directing the Senate Committee on Public Services to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the comprehensive traffic program of the government amid the worsening traffic gridlocks where precious resources and man-hours are wasted, with the end in view of determining if such traffic management plan would actually ease congestion in major urban centers and speed up the safe and efficient movement of people and goods by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Services.
32, redirecting the Senate Committee on Public Works to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status and viability of the approved flood management master plan for Metro Manila and surrounding areas with the end in view of ensuring a comprehensive and cost-efficient solution to the flooding problem and would immediately bring relief to the public by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Works.
33, directing the Senate Committee on Public Services to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the mass transit roadmap of the government with the end in view of determining its viability and ensuring a safe, reliable, efficient, and affordable public transit system by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Services.
34, directing the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of the Philippine National Police Regular Recruitment Program with the end in view of ensuring the attainment of the ideal police-to-population ratio of the policeman for every 500 people and to promote transparency in the utilization of the allocated funds for its purpose by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Finance.
35, resolution directing the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the bidding process of public-private partnership projects with the end in view of ensuring that the Filipino people will benefit from quality public services at the least possible cost by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Works.
36, directing the Senate Committees on Labor and Employment and Human Resources Development and on Economic Affairs to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the job generation program of the government in the face of the high underemployment rate and pervasive in-work poverty despite the strong gross domestic product growth in the last 10 years by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment and Human Resources Development and Economic Affairs.
37, arguing the Senate Committee on Energy to conduct a comprehensive review and assessment in aid of legislation of ARIA 9136 or the Electric Power Industry Reform Act of 2001 with the end view of amending the law in order to make it more effective in lowering electricity rates by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Energy and Public Services.
38, a resolution directing the Senate Committee on Finance to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the contingent liabilities arising from public-private partnership projects with the end in view of institutionalizing fiscal discipline and strengthening government mechanisms to enforce the transparency and accountability over the utilization and reporting of public funds by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Finance.
39, directing the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the conflicting data of the Bureau of the Treasury and the Department of Energy and revenues collected from the Malampaya National Gas Project with the end in view of reconciling all books of accounts pertaining to the Malampaya Fund and collecting the correct royalties due to the Philippine government by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Ways and Means and Energy.
40, a resolution directing the Senate Committee on Energy to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the service contracts issued by the Department of Energy to the energy exploration companies with the end in view of ensuring that such contracts are not disadvantageous to government and to indigenous energy resources by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Energy.
41, directing the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the La Nina phenomenon and to determine the appropriate Philippine government intervention with the intent of strengthening the mandates of government agencies and ensuring the safety and security of the Filipino people by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Climate Change and National Defense and Security.
42, directing the Senate Committee on Public Works to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status of mass transit projects and the Public-Private Partnership Center project pipeline with the end in view of lowering the risk of delays and fostering transparency and accountability by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Works.
43, directing the Senate Committee on Finance to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the submission of a post-budget status report of the national government with the end in view of legislating more effective and responsive government appropriations and strengthening the government mechanisms to ensure transparency and accountability over the utilization of public funds by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Finance.
44, directing the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media and the Ways and Means to conduct an inquiry and look into in aid of legislation the distribution of amusement tax collected by the local government units and Metro Manila and in such other places where all any film festival entry is exhibited simultaneously during the film festival period starting from 2002 up to the present by Senator Soto III.
To the Committees on Public Information and Mass Media and Ways and Means.
45, directing the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media to conduct an inquiry and look into in aid of legislation the new rules of selection imposed by the Metro Manila Film Festival by Senator Soto III.
To the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media.
46, urging the Senate Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development to conduct an inquiry and aid of legislation as to the implementation of Republic Act numbers 7432 and 9994 benefiting our senior citizens and the hurdles leading to various interpretations in compliance to said laws with the objective of formulating a uniform set of rules or guidelines for its effective implementation by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development.
47, urging the Philippine National Police to maintain and operate an improved 24/7 dedicated direct national emergency hotline to address crime situations and assistance and avenue for citizens' predicaments and similar other peace and order issues on a real-time proactive engagement by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
48, recommending to the Design Center of the Philippines, the Department of Trade and Industry, and other concerned state agencies to conduct strategic studies to promote the creative services industry like animation, smartphone application and game development, gaming solutions, and mobile internet startup operations with the objectives of tapping potential investments and creating new employment opportunities for enthusiasts, information technology personnel, and the Filipino youth by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, and Science and Technology.
49, directing the Senate Committees on Youth and on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development to conduct a study in aid of legislation on youth joblessness, taking into consideration the recent government statistics of 1.190 million youth unemployment in January 2016, with the objectives of strengthening policies and introducing dynamic measures aimed at generating opportunities for young people and the unemployed by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Youth and Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
50, urging the Departments of Foreign Affairs and Energy and the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute to conduct short and long-term scientific/marine research studies and exploration and development approaches on the Benham Rise, a 13 million hectare underwater territory off eastern Luzon, and submit to the Senate relevant legislative recommendations indicating full possession and ownership by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Energy and Foreign Relations.
51, urging the Senate Committee on Health and Demography to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation regarding the status of preventive health care in the country with the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation's Tamang Serbisyo para sa Kalusugan ng Pamilya program as backdrop, aimed at utilizing the said program as a model for preventive health care, and further studying the feasibility of institutionalizing its implementation at the grassroots level and local government units by Senator Poe.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Local Development and Local Government.
52, recommending to the Department of Foreign Affairs and relevant offices to study and to consider for possible adherence and acquiescence the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights as a strong and unequivocal statement about the valuable human rights by Senator Poe.
To the Committee on Foreign Relations.
53, urging the proper Senate committees to evaluate the government's infrastructure program in the light of the dismal ranking of the Philippines in terms of quality of overall infrastructure in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report 2013 to 2014, and to recommend measures to revamp the country's infrastructure facilities by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Public Works.
54, urging the appropriate Senate committees to conduct a relevant study in aid of legislation on the various laws and policies governing application for licenses, permits, and clearances, including the implementation of the e-commerce law, with the intention of simplifying bureaucratic procedures, eradicating red tape, and promoting Philippine competitiveness by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship and Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation.
55, resolution urging a review of existing government infrastructure and investments in information and communications technology with the end in view of realizing the full potentials of the industry, addressing the slow internet speed in the country and sustained economic growth by Senator Grace Poe.
To the Committee on Public Services.
56, recognizing and commending Conrad Yue for his invaluable contribution to Philippine sports as the first Filipino who qualified for the semi-final round of a Grand Slam tennis tournament by Senator Sonny Angara.
To the Committee on Rules.
57, directing the appropriate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the viability of the prevailing pension programs of the military and other uniformed personnel organizations with the intent of ensuring equitable allocation of government resources, adequate benefits and assistance to Filipino pensioners, and the sustainability of government pension programs by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on National Defense and Security, Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, and Finance.
And proposed Senate Resolution number 58, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the status and distribution of proceeds from the sale of portions of Metro Manila military camps in accordance with Republic Act number 7227, otherwise known as the Basis Conversion and Development Act of 1991 as amended, with the end in view of ensuring that said proceeds were permitted by the BCDA and were utilized for their intended purposes by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, may I move that we recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros to speak on a matter of public interest? So move, Mr. President.
Okay, with the permission of the Chamber, Senator Risa Ontiveros is recognized to deliver her privileged speech.
Salamat po, Mr. Senate President. I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege. Mga kasamang senador at mga kasama mula sa kilusang masa na nandito ngayong hapon sa gallery, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. What a great honor it is for me to rise before you today to deliver the first privileged speech of the 17th Congress and my first privileged speech as Senator of this Republic. To be honest, this still feels surreal to me, and I stand in this chamber perhaps with a little disbelief, but also with a heart that is both grateful and ready. I'm eager to learn from all of you and to learn with all of you for the next 6 years. Ours, Mr. President, is the Centennial Senate. I stand in this chamber cognizant of the weight of collective history that we bear on our shoulders as members of a Senate that has for 100 years accompanied this country from its fragile beginnings as a young republic, through the ravages of war, amidst the atrocities of martial law, and throughout the painstaking process of rebuilding democracy piece by piece, institution by institution. I stand in this chamber, too, cognizant of my own privilege, of which I am constantly aware and for which I am immeasurably grateful. I know that since 1947, there have been only 22 women senators of the Republic, an astounding gender governance gap in a country where women are more educated than our male counterparts. I'm also humbly aware that I stand small in the footsteps of the first Filipino senator from the Philippine left, the great trade unionist and socialist Isabelo de los Reyes. After 90 years, this country has once more decided to elect a senator from the Democratic left. Don Belong, kabayan niyo po ako. Handa na po ako. My victory in 2016, after a 7-year grand adventure defying gravity, is a victory that I cannot claim only for myself. It is a victory of my comrades and allies who steadfastly believed that the Senate, this chamber of 24, was within reach of someone from the Democratic left. There were many who said, tama na, magpahinga muna. But there were many more who said to keep on going. They said, and I quote, sadyang may mga laban na hindi dapat binibitawan. And so with these people, I kept on going, heartbreak after heartbreak, because we believe that the Senate can be a platform to continue the struggles that are important to us, fighting inequality, defending the marginalized, protecting participatory democracy, upholding human rights, and interfacing human rights with women's dignity and health care. In short, the Senate as a force for good and a means towards transformative change. Ito pong dahilan kung bakit hindi po ako sumuko. Ito pong dahilan kung bakit patuloy na tumataya. This is also why I stand before you, Mr. President, this afternoon. We are standing on the precipice of history, and it is my belief that how we act within the next 3 years, or even the next year, can rewrite the destiny of our country. Dramatic decisions are being made by the day that will have lasting impacts on our institutions, our laws, on the Constitution as we live and know it. These lasting impacts can create either structural improvements leading to durable benefits or wreak massive damage that, like the 20-year Marcos dictatorship, would take several decades to undo. Now more than ever, our role as senators is crucial in preserving that which is good and protecting this country from all that is damaging. I have 3 points. Firstly, let's work to reduce inequality through legislation that is humane and people-centered, and commit to fight legislation that is anti-poor. The President himself has given his word to support the implementation of the reproductive health law, which for me empowers women by providing us access to critical reproductive health information and services. He has also committed to expand the coverage of PhilHealth, continuing what we started in the areas of health and human development. Let us partner RH law implementation and PhilHealth coverage expansion with the passage of other laws that will support and uphold universal health. It is scandalous that 6 out of 10 Filipinos still die without ever having seen a doctor. Our urgent task moving forward towards universal health care is to approach truly universal coverage and ensure access to quality, affordable health care. The fight for universal health is indeed a fight for social justice. But since criminal justice appears to be the lingua franca of the hour, it is important to highlight that it is also a fight against the social ills that lead to crime. Mr. President, several scientific studies have already linked prenatal and perinatal health problems to later delinquent or criminal behavior. There are even studies showing a connection between pregnancy complications and violence. Yet, instead of creating laws that lead to more welfare-enhancing outcomes for our children, we aggressively push for laws that label them criminals younger and younger, that punish them instead of trying to rehabilitate them. Instead of showing that there is a way out of the cycle of violence, we teach them that there is no redemption for crime and no hope in sight for going astray by passing a law that allows the state to take a life. And instead of treating drugs as a public health problem also, as is increasingly being done all over the world, we view drug addiction only through the lens of criminal justice and encourage the vigilante killings of suspected drug addicts. Mr. President, let us be the Senate that will stand on the side of social justice and on the side of the poor. Let us make clear our bias for the marginalized and our regard for those who have less in life. As President Duterte himself said during his SONA, enduring peace can only be attained if we meet the fundamental needs of every man, woman, and child. Napakarami ng nasimulan natin sa larangang ito, partikular sa kalusugan. This includes Republic Act 10606 or the National Health Insurance Act of 2013, RA 10645, which provides mandatory coverage to senior citizens, RA 10351 or the Sin Tax Law, which finances universal health programs through excise taxes from cigarettes, liquor, and gambling, and RA 10643 or the Graphic Health Warning Law. The President said change is coming. But Mr. Senate President, change had been coming, and change takes time because it is generational. So we must be indefatigable in sustaining and continuing to build on the seeds that have already been planted. It can only be possible through a sure-footed, reform-oriented Senate committed to the needs of the weak and vulnerable, and understanding that sometimes you do need to regulate the rich to protect and promote the interests of the poor. Secondly, let us be the Senate that will protect the Constitution and protect democracy from authoritarian excesses. This administration has not been mum about its desire to amend the Constitution to shift to a federal system. My beloved party Akbayan and I support opening conversations on federalism and the good that it can do for our country. But we also believe that constitutional amendments can best be done through a constitutional convention rather than a constituent assembly or even at this time a constitutional commission. This is a position we have held consistently since the founding of our party in 1998. While the latter might indeed be more cost-efficient, we believe there is a greater need to protect the sacrosanct process of amending the Charter from self-interest or perceptions of self-interest. Further, and more importantly, in the process of changing the highest law of the land, there is nothing more important than being deliberative and participatory. I am ready to listen to new arguments and participate in debates and caucuses, and I will support a process that is pluralist and inclusive. Isang mapanlahok na proseso lamang po ang makasisiguro na ang bagong saligang batas ay mananatiling tumutugon sa pangangailangan ng ating sambayanan. Mr. President, let us continue our tradition of independence and checks and balances towards the deepening of democracy. Let us be the Senate that can balance the imperatives of the here and now with wider considerations of protecting institutions and protecting the democratic foundations that we have painstakingly built over the years. Yes, we need to disperse resources from the center to the fringes. Yes, we need strong solutions to the wide gamut of challenges and problems that confront modern daily life. Yes, we need to streamline and simplify access to government services. But let us not use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, especially if that sledgehammer can hit us on the head and cause us to hemorrhage to death. Let us continue to be the Senate that can say no, that can say enough is enough, that can say not on our watch. Thirdly, Mr. President, let us be the Senate that preserves the values that make us who we are, that define us as a people. We're not bloodthirsty spectators in a Roman Colosseum or a savage mob cheering the burning of witches at the stake. We are a strong, brave, compassionate people. We weather the hardest typhoons that the planet has ever known. We defeat dictators through people power. We come from a lineage of heroes. They who die on the battlefield or write poems that stoke a revolution. Ours is a history of fighting against oppressors who claim and fight for our human rights. To claim and fight for our human rights. Contrary to recent averments, human rights have never been used as a shield or an excuse to destroy the country. On the contrary, human rights have built this nation, and an unflagging, relentless commitment to asserting them has over time led to better labor standards, the right to vote, the right to form unions, the right to free expression of ideas, the right of women to be in public office. The notion of human rights has given birth to the principle that healthcare should be universal, that women should have a voice in policy making. Naniniwala po ako na ito ang dapat ipaglaban ng ating Senado dahil ang karapatang pantao ay parehong binhi at punla ng isang mayamang demokrasya. These are the values that we need to preserve for our children. These are also the values that are our legacy from the past and will carry us into the future as a modern democracy, where rules work for all, where government is accountable, where human rights are valued, where cardboard signs are school projects and not markers of death. Mr. President, let us be the Senate that will be remembered in history as the Senate of the brave. Marami pong salamat at mabuhay ang sambayanan.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, the following senators have signified their intention to interpellate the distinguished lady from Akbayan if she will yield. Senators Sani Angara and Senator Francis Pangilinan, Mr. President. So may we recognize at this point Senator Angara?
Senator Angara is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. I would like to ask my good friend, the lady formerly from Akbayan, the party list, and my colleague in the 13th and 14th Congress, if she would yield to a few questions, Mr. President.
Gladly, Mr. President.
Thank you, dear colleague. I congratulate you, first of all, dear colleague, Mr. President, because on just our second week of session, the lady from Panay Island has made known her legislative priorities in a short span, and I congratulate her for that. And I congratulate her for being consistent since our days in the House, where we fought side by side for many important pieces of legislation, Mr. President. I can think of reproductive health law, the universal health care law, the Magna Carta of Women, the cheaper medicines law, which she was at the forefront. And again, she mentioned the need to have better health care for the poorest of the poor. And I have no doubt, as Chairman of Health, she will be pursuing these advocacies. My initial question, Mr. President, is how do we deal with the tremendous health gap in the rural areas, where, as you mentioned, 6 out of 10 Filipinos do not have access to medical doctors, and maybe their first line of access is a barangay health worker or a daycare worker or the midwife. How do we address this going forward, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. Initially, the statistics are really astounding. And this was confirmed to me even by our new Health Secretary, Secretary Pauline Obial, in my courtesy call to her just a couple of weeks ago, that indeed out of the 46,000 barangays in the country, only 20,000 so far have barangay health stations. And I'm willing to bet, Mr. President, that the majority of the more than half of our barangays which don't yet have those barangay health stations are in fact located in our rural areas, and therefore the greater urgency to stress our rural health agenda. Again, Mr. President, it is really correct to say that in many of these doctorless or underserved barangays, especially in the rural areas, it is the barangay health workers who provide our citizens, rural sectors such as farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples, the frontline health service that our citizens expect from government. And one of the ways that I see that we can move towards universal health care or AUHC system even in the rural areas is to strengthen that one of the 6 pillars or building blocks of a UHC system, which is the health service providers. And the BHW are among the bayani or the heroes of the health service providers. And with them and for them, in fact, I have filed a bill to raise their compensation in order to provide them not just higher motivation or incentive to continue their lifetime of sacrifice and service for our citizens, especially in the rural areas, but also to enable them to provide their families a more decent quality of life. The rural areas, Mr. President, are also where we need to increase our public health facilities. And again here, the super barangay health centers that I started talking about during the previous campaign are one of the legislative agenda that I would like to pursue here in our Senate and in partnership with our Department of Health. Last but not the least, Mr. President, I am eager to strengthen through amendment Republic Act 8344 or our anti-hospital deposit bill also for our rural hospitals in order to ensure the rights, especially of pregnant women and women actually delivering their babies already who arrive at the ERs, not to be turned away simply because they cannot pay the deposit or the down payment. And I would like to do this, Mr. President, through not just a stick approach, but a carrot and stick approach, in addition to revisiting and possibly increasing the penalties for non-compliance, also enabling private hospitals to partner with public hospitals to close the public health care gap, especially in the rural areas, by providing them incentives if they comply fully with the provisions of RA 8344.
Mr. President, I thank our colleague for the most comprehensive answer she gave, and I support most of, or if not all of the legislative initiatives she has put forward in her answer. Is it feasible, Mr. President, to meet that shortfall of 20,000 barangays who are not possessed of a health center?
Mr. President, as with everything good that we want to achieve, and as I mentioned earlier, change takes time. And it has a lot to do also with the monies that we actually have for Congress to appropriate and for our executive to spend in implementing the programs. And this was one of the things I was very glad to be enlightened on also by Secretary Ubial during my courtesy call on her, that we could, for starters, in order to meet the gap of the 26,000 barangays still needing primary healthcare institution in their areas, not necessarily in the first blow to construct and operate these per barangay, but possibly in clusters of 4 to 5 barangays or in contiguous municipalities, but simply ensuring that there is an adequate complement of health service providers to count among doctors, nurses, midwives, barangay health workers, if not to be based in each barangay at the outset in the first of these 6 years, at least to be responsible to monitor the health status and the health needs even of those other barangays where they are not yet physically based, but where they will conduct their monthly service and monitoring missions.
So, President, one of the challenges, I think, in public health is to attract qualified and good doctors to serve in the provinces with the provincial hospitals. Is there, I know the Aquino administration also went on a hiring binge of doctors and nurses, but what is the status currently, if the lady from Panay knows, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. I am the lady from Panay and from Cavite, but also still from Akbayan. Mr. President, I don't have the exact figures right now as to the shortfall on the doctors, nurses, midwives, and barangay health workers per barangay health station up to the tertiary hospitals. But yes, it remains a legacy from the previous administration for our current administration to ensure that over time and in order to fulfill the requirement for a universal healthcare system on the health service provider pillar, that there is a sufficient complement. There is a gold standard of the World Health Organization that there should be a ratio of 24 health service providers of whatever type, from doctor to BHW, 24 per 10,000 population. One recent statistic I learned of was that our current our ratio in the Philippines is 2.3 ratio per 10,000 population. Kumbaga, kung nasa palengke tayo, kulang pa ng isang guhit para maging man lamang 10%. So it's really an important and an urgent need for us to up that complement of health service providers. One way I see, Mr. President, that we can continue to attract more of the best and the brightest into our especially public hospitals, from the barangay health station up to the tertiary level, is actually an overlap between our education and the health sectors. I would like to explore, Mr. President, the possibility of providing more scholarships to interested young people interested in the medical sciences to our public or state colleges and universities offering health science courses, with the condition that once they graduate from these scholarships, from these courses, maglalaan muna sila ng at least 2 taon ng serbisyo dito sa ating bansa, lalo na sa mga rural areas natin, bago pa man pumunta sa specializations at sa mga tertiary hospitals sa urban areas, o di kaya pumunta sa ibang mga bansa. Of course, in the long term, we want to afford not only our BHWs but also doctors, nurses, and midwives to give their families a decent standard of living, kaya't maigi rin pong pag-aralan paano aasikasuhin ang kanilang mga sweldo at kanilang mga benepisyo sa ilalim ng ating mga batas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed that the lady from Cavite, Panay, and Akbayan also served on the board of PhilHealth, Mr. President. And I would like to, she mentioned it in her speech, and I noticed there have been great strides in PhilHealth because of the law authored by Senator Drilon, the sin tax law, which I think gave 97 billion in terms of coverage for PhilHealth. But I know we still could use some improvement, Mr. President. And what areas does the good lady see as priorities in this respect?
Mr. President, I think that the BIR has constantly, quarter-on-quarter, reported to us that the sin tax take of government is holding steady and in fact even slowly increasing. As I was sharing with the good Senator Gatchalian earlier, over the 2 years, late 2014 till late 2015, that I served on the board of PhilHealth, we actually saw an increase of the sin tax contribution from national government into the PhilHealth funds. And BIR could probably tell us that this looks like something that we are looking at for the long term, something sustained and something even slowly increasing. In relation to that, I hope that we can explore earmarking these sin taxes for additional specific health measures. For example, Mr. President, improving health facilities that the good Senator Angara and I were talking about earlier, the establishment of a health promotion institute, for which I also recently filed the bill and which I started discussing with Secretary Ubial during my courtesy call on her. That bill proposes that 2% of sin taxes be assigned to this Health Promotion Institute. And then, Mr. President, earmarking sin taxes also for expanded PhilHealth coverage, for example, for persons with disabilities. And I also did file a bill on that recently.
Mr. President, I noticed the lady from Akbayan mentioned in one of the first sentences of her speech that we are a country where men are less educated than women. I was just wondering if there are any statistics to support this statement, which I've long suspected because when I was at the UP College of Law, from which the presiding officer also is a graduate of, there were more women accepted or who passed the law aptitude examination test. So I've always suspected that somehow the other sex is more gifted in certain respects, but I was wondering if there's any empirical data to support this, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I hope the good Senator Angara was not offended by that. Certainly, as one scientist whose name I'm senior momenting about right now said that he never let his schooling get in the way of his education. I can get back to you soon as Mr. President with the stats on that, but I do remember essay-wise, not numbers-wise, that in fact there's a higher complement of girls who finish certain levels of our formal education system, elementary or high school or college. But there is somewhere in between, somewhere in the high school years, a certain drop, but then we come back in the tertiary levels. I'm sorry not to give a very satisfying answer in terms of the statistics, but I will get back to you on that. And in any case, just to close my incomplete answer at this point in time, certainly better schooled or better educated doesn't necessarily mean more knowledgeable or wiser.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm satisfied with the answer, and I was not hurt at all, I have to say. Again, I ask about charter change and what is the position. The lady expressed a preference for a convention rather than a move to convert Congress into a constituent assembly. May we know in greater detail, Mr. President, what are the reasons for this opinion she holds?
Mr. President, I am still to participate in a caucus within our Senate on what will become the position of our chamber on this burning issue of charter change through constituent assembly or through some other mode. So what I will share today in response to the question of the good Senator Angara are not yet hard and fast rules for me, but affirmations of the position of my party, Akbayan, and the baon, the brown bag that I will bring into that caucus towards forming, contributing towards our final position. For example, Mr. President, it has been mentioned in public fora that the costs of a CONCON would far outweigh that of a CONAS, and we have figures from what was the cost of the convention proper of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, based on which we could estimate that the operational expenses of a constitutional convention would be around 90 million, but just, Mr. President, for the convention proper. We are not yet talking about the election of the delegates and afterwards the ratification of the proposed amendments. However, if those would be synchronized with either the general elections or the barangay SK elections, the costs involved could be mitigated. Also, former COMELEC Chairman Brillantes has gone on record as saying that a CONCON would cost a total of 14 billion pesos. So there seems to be a wide range in the estimates of how much the whole process would actually cost. Whereas, on the CONAS, House Majority Leader Fariña stated that the CONAS would be more practical because he estimated that it would spend no more than 2 billion compared to 6 to 7 billion for a CONCON. But again, and I will bring these figures into the questioning that we will do in a caucus. And in the end, I would say in terms of cost that some things may cost more money-wise, but in terms of the quality of the process, especially in terms of the participation of our citizens, not just the delegates, would probably be worth that greater expense. Additionally, Mr. President, the CONCON is more non-partisan. According to our former Senate President, members of Congress could, and I'm sure we would also discuss this in our caucus, at the time of the adoption of the resolutions, not be qualified to be elected to the CONCON. Delegates to the CONCON could also be elected by administrative region based on the number of legislative districts in the region. And lastly, Mr. President, on my initial thoughts, based on the position of my party, Akbayan, on constitutional reform through CONAS or through some other mode, CONCON could arguably avoid conflicts of interest. Sensitive provisions in the Constitution, such as the Anti-Dynasty Clause, party list system, and economic provisions could be studied and amended accordingly by objective constitutional experts, instead of some whose personal interests may be at stake. So those are some of the points I would bring into the caucus that I am looking forward to participating in, Mr. President.
Mr. President, does the lady from Akbayan know that we have in our midst the Benjamin of the 1971 Constitutional Convention?
Yes, Mr. President. The good Senator Gordon.
I'm sure Senator Richard Gordon would at one point enlighten us with the differences, having been chair before of the Senate Committee on Constitutional Amendments. My father was also a member of the 1971 Constitutional Convention. The lady mentioned, Mr. President, that she and her party, Akbayan, welcomed the opening of the dialogue or the debate on charter change. May I ask which particular areas she feels must be prioritized for reform?
One and only one, Mr. President, the shift in the form of government. As is reflected in our party platform, the shift to parliamentary form of government and the shift to a federal form of government that is appropriate to the Philippines.
Mr. President, I'm quite satisfied with the answers given by our friend from Akbayan, Cavite, Capiz, Aklan, Iloilo, and the rest of Panay Island. I believe the Committee on Health is in good hands with Senator Risa Hontiveros, and I do believe that when the time comes that she will stand up for the poor and the marginalized, she will stand up for social justice. I say this because I have seen her work up close in 6 years, and I'm confident she will do the same here in the Senate. Thank you for responding to these representation's queries.
Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Senator Pangilinan has given way to Senator Aquino, but with the consent of the distinguished lady, may we move for a few minutes of break to allow the Senate President and the Majority Leader to satisfy their liquidity problems, Mr. President.
We will continue with the interpellation once we resume session.
Yes. Thank you, Mr.
Session
President.
is suspended. Ron, ayusin natin, Ron. Yung... Oh, yun. Ayaw ba naman? Ayun si Bam.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Our session is resumed.
May we continue to recognize the distinguished lady from Akbayan, Senator Ontiveros, and to interpolate Senator Bam Aquino.
Senator Bam Aquino is recognized to interpolate Senator Ontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Will the good lady from Panay, Cavite, Iloilo, and Akbayan yield to a few questions?
Gladly, Mr. President.
Mr. President, first of all, maybe before the question, let me first commend the lady for her speech. And specifically, I would like to put on record that I am with her in one of her pet bills, which is making sure that all of our PWD brothers and sisters are in PhilHealth. So I filed a counterpart bill, and in fact, this increases or this keeps our advocacy with regard to supporting our PWD. So for that, I commend the good lady.
Thank you, Mr. President. And likewise, I commend the sustained efforts of the good Senator Aquino for our different basic sectors to enjoy universal health care.
Yes, actually, Mr. President, we were successful in helping our PWDs get VAT-free, making them VAT-free, no? And maybe this second advocacy, which the good lady shares with everyone here who is supportive of this measure, will definitely be a big help for our PWDs. No? But let me ask regarding, she talked about PhilHealth, no? And she also talked about drug addiction as a public health matter, aside from it being a criminal justice matter. So, Mr. President, I would like to ask the good lady, how is drug addiction treated maybe in other countries? Or when she talks about drug addiction as a public health issue, what does it exactly mean, and what are the movements of government on that front, if it is seen with that lens as well?
Thank you, Mr. President. There are, in fact, models of the healthcare approach to drug use in other countries that we could consider in the Philippines to complement our criminal justice approach to the drug problem. So more of the healthcare approach. There are several countries, including here in Asia, for example, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, as well as in other continents, notably Latin America, which suffers that scourge called narcopolitics. And some of the most instructive models are in Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina. And then a few also in Europe, Portugal, the Czech Republic, Netherlands. Perhaps, Mr. President, there are two of these countries pinaka-interesante because they have made a policy statement about the relationship between the drug problem and health, and using that lens to analyze and to effectively respond to the drug problem. And this, Mr. President, would be Vietnam, so in our own region, and believe it or not, Colombia. For example, in Vietnam, they made a series of revisions to their law on drug control in 2008 and even to their penal code in 2009. And that revised law on drug control of 2008 acknowledges that drug use is a social problem and that drug use should be provided with treatment instead of punishment. So quite radical sounding, but it's actually happened in another Asian country, so in our own region. And then when we look at Colombia, Mr. President, in 2012, the Colombian Constitutional Court made an historic ruling which was followed by the passage of a new law that makes drug addiction a matter of public health and obliges the state to provide or to guarantee comprehensive treatment for those who seek it voluntarily.
Yeah, Mr. President, on that point, in our country, is there a guarantee that if you ask for treatment or rehabilitation, you will be given this, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, and for me this is, oh dear, I'm senior momenting again the term. But what I meant was I've been following the media coverage about this problem, including on the rehabilitation side, where they in fact report that government is committed to providing even the rehabilitation services, but there's a dearth of a sufficient number of institutions, public and even private, in order to respond to the numbers of persons who in recent months have been quote-unquote surrendering for various motivations, but under the compelling reason of the current anti-drug campaign. And so I would say, in response to the question of the good Senator Aquino, Mr. President, that there is a guarantee in principle that government and society wants to rehabilitate drug dependence, but it's a matter of capacity. And then also, I would suggest that if we also add to the criminal justice lens, the public health lens, to analyzing and responding to the drug problem, that it will actually increase our effectiveness in rehabilitating voluntary or drug dependents who voluntarily turn themselves in for this rehab.
Mr. President.
With the permission of both Senators Ontiveros and Aquino, I'd
Yes,
like
please,
the Chair
Mr.
recognizes Senator Soto.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the distinguished senators, just as an answer to the query of Senator Aquino, yes, there is Section 8, Article 8, Section 54, 55, 56, 57 of the Republic Act 9165 has coverage on voluntary submission, Mr. President. That covers everything, especially what's happening now. It's just a matter of implementing.
Yes, thank you, Majority Floor
Senator
Leader.
Soto.
But maybe let me jump off from the good lady, what the good lady from Akbayan had said, that in our laws, there is provision for it, but in practice, kulang yung ating facilities. So maybe, Mr. President, as the good lady is the chairman of health, this is something her committee can look at. Not only putting in budget, because I think that's probably the first step, no? Making sure it's funded, but more than that, making sure that our rehab facilities can actually accept all of these surrenderies and complement the war against drugs. No? Let me ask the good lady, kung ako po PhilHealth member at gusto kong magpa-rehab, pwede ba ako makakuha ng benefits from PhilHealth to pay for my rehabilitation?
Unfortunately, Mr. President, excuse me, if I remember correctly, there is not yet a case, there's a list of so-called case rates by PhilHealth, more than 1,000 to date, about 1,300 plus. But if my memory serves me correctly, there is not one yet for drug dependency rehabilitation. And I suppose that is also why, Mr. President, there were recent suggestions publicly that rehabilitation from drug dependence also be covered possibly by PhilHealth. And I think that is something worth exploring, whether PhilHealth or whichever instrumentality or agency of government should be capacitated or mandated to spend the monies for this.
Thank you, Mr. President, because I think this is also something the good lady who's the chairperson of health can explore. That if PhilHealth can also cover the cost of rehabilitation of drug dependents, then you find a way to actually pay for the cost that needs to be shouldered, no, by government. So with that, Mr. President, let me end my short interpellation there. I'd like to congratulate Senator Ontiveros, the good lady from all of these places, and especially from Akbayan. Maraming salamat and good luck with your very esteemed committee. Salamat. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader.
Marami pong salamat, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we recognize the distinguished gentleman from Zambales and the youngest member of the CONCON in the olden times, Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank our good Majority Floor Leader for giving us a lesson in history, but I will remind him that the father of our Senate President was also a member of the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah.
And there was Senator Raul Roco, the late Senator Raul Roco, Senator Gerson Alvarez, Senator Gingona, Senator Angara, and of course, I was the youngest. Thank you very much. Would you gently yield?
Yes, Mr. President.
First, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I'd like to congratulate our distinguished colleague from Akbayan and from Cavite and et cetera, all the way up to Panay and everywhere for her maiden speech. Actually, this is the first privileged speech, if I'm not mistaken. And let me just say that I was listening with one ear while discussing certain things with our colleagues at the refectory a while ago. And I did come back, I heard Senator Angara ask me about the Constitutional Convention. Is it correct to say that you are really here representing the views of Akbayan, that you want a constitutional convention instead of a constituent assembly?
Yes, Mr. President, I reiterated in my speech the platform and the position on the mode of constitutional reform preferred at this point in time by my party.
Yes, and of course you're aware that in 1971 when we were all elected, I remember I was in the student council of UP at the time, and we clamored together with the late Ed Hobson from Ateneo for a non-partisan constitutional convention. Are you aware of that?
Yes, Mr. President.
And of course what transpired afterwards was that the elections of 1971 were practically intervened with or interfered with, and that doesn't necessarily make it wrong, that a number of people were elected from families, I would not call them dynastic, from political parties, even if there was a clamor for non-partisanship in the Constitutional Convention. In fact, I think you will agree with me that it is very hard to remove partisanship or partisan politics in any deliberative body in this country. Would you agree?
I would agree, Mr. President, that it's difficult or perhaps even humanly impossible to remove partisanship from any deliberative body. But I would like to explore in the coming discussions about the possibly best mode for reforming the Constitution, precisely what might be the mode that could insulate or mitigate the partisanship, the political partisanship in that process by such means as enhancing more of citizens' participation, those same citizens who would be counted as the constituents of the delegates in a CONCON.
After all, I'm sure the gentle lady will accept the fact that the absence of ideology or platform in most of our political parties has really been the bane of our country. I remember when I was still in college, not too very long ago, along with Senate President Rilon, we were clamoring for ideological parties. I was with Raul Manglapus at that time. I was still in college, and there was no ideology. We referred to the Liberal Party and the Nationalist Party as one party with two factions. And the term turncoatism became very fashionable at the time. You're aware of that?
Yes, Mr. President.
And you're also aware of the fact that it never rose, even if our distinguished colleague, the Right Honorable Senior Citizen Ed Angara, wanted to put in what we call funding for the political parties by our government, so that eventually, just as suggested by certain NGOs like the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Germany, the government serves to nurture the growth of political parties by making sure that they are part of the budget, provided they, they don't go beyond the pale, so-called. And because of that, to say that the Constitutional Convention will be elected will not be partisanship is again an elusive goal. But we are all aware of the fact that when we were all elected, the people ought to know, and ignorance of the law is no excuse, that any senator or congressman is imbued by the Constitution with the privilege of being allowed to amend the Constitution, either by calling for a constitutional convention, 2/3 vote, or by calling for or constituting itself as a constituent assembly by 3/4 vote. I'm sure we're all aware of that, right?
Yes, Mr. President, I'm aware of that. And as a quick aside, I'm glad that the good Senator Gordon mentioned something that's a seed of what I hope can be the next electoral reform, which is campaign finance reform. Precisely looking at models also in other countries where the state will give a subsidy to each political party depending on the number of votes it earned in the previous election. So that being their public funds for the campaign, and then they being able to raise counterpart contributions from the private sector equal only to that. And then, of course, still having to make a report to the COMELEC afterwards.
Subject to the assurance that they will not be regulatorily captured by the collections that they make from the private sector.
Yes, Mr. President.
That's correct. And that is why I was talking with the delegate from Bicol, Laila de Lima, who wanted me to turn over the Committee on Electoral Reforms, which she thought I was pursuing. But I was told by the Senate President that Laila de Lima, our distinguished delegate from Bicol, wanted it. And although I was chairman of that committee last time, I said willingly I will give it to her, although a lot of my constituents, not just in Zambales but elsewhere, because of our authorship of the ultimate election law, wanted me to take over that, particularly the oversight functions thereof. And I said willingly, and she was gracious enough to tell me that she would make me the vice chairman. And I can see her nodding for the record. Having said that, I did not trade that. I mean, I would have been a member by itself. But the point that I would like to make now, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, is that in this discourse of yours, you're aware of the fact that, the young lady is aware of the fact that in the 1971 Constitutional Convention, the Constitutional Convention attained a life of its own. And it took them about 4 to 6 months, not mentioning the fact that they had to go through an election, which was expensive by itself. And I'm not just talking about here of expense, but when they got elected, there was a lot of brouhaha just in forming the rules or electing the officials of the convention, the president, the vice president of the convention. There was an awful lot of tremors, earthquakes, recriminations, accusations left and right, and it took a while before we finally got our convention going. And of course, I just want to raise this point as well, just as a matter of information, that it took a long time, so much so that in the end, President Marcos, who was the president at that time, decided to intervene because we were not even halfway across finishing the Constitution, and Mr. Marcos intervened in the fashioning of the 1971 Constitution. You're aware of that?
Yes, Mr. President. Although, of course, I think Mr. Marcos, bless his soul, intervened for other reasons than that he might have thought the CONCON was taking too much time. I think it's in our history lessons that there were other political considerations which were not the fault of the CONCON.
Well, being there, part of the reason was he was going to declare martial law.
Exactly, Mr. President.
And I was one of those against it. I even voted to ban Mr. Marcos from extending his term. And I was with Senator Pimentel at that time, Senator Manglapus, and the excuse was it was taking too long, and so they decided to intervene. And eventually, the Constitution was ratified, especially after a promise was made, and with all due respect, that was part of stratagem on the part of the then President, when he even promised some of the delegates that they would be members of the assembly that was going to come out. And they joke at that time, a proclamation, 1102, which I think never really existed, but we were told that we had a proclamation 1102, which in Tagalog parlance was na, or rather Spanish, na once na, na otu pa. That the Congress, the delegates who were supposed to be future congressmen never got, to take their seats. In fact, Congress was abolished for a while, and much later on, the interim Batasan Pambasa was set up. I'm sure the young lady is aware of that, being an activist lady.
One reflection that arises in my mind, Mr. President, through this discussion is that in the same way that cost notwithstanding, the trouble of a certain process notwithstanding, if it will be the wisdom of the Senate or of the whole government that a certain mode, say, for example, CONCON, is the better one, we could come to that decision because we will estimate that it will be worth the expense, it will be worth the trouble. To borrow an idea that I picked up from my seatmate, the good Senator Gatchalian, because a constitution is for posterity. It's for many generations down the road. And if we can provide for something better as our basic law of the land for the generations that will follow after us, then maybe it would be worth the so-called greater expense and trouble.
I think I'm not ready to relinquish my idealism as yet, even at this advanced stage of my life, if you will call that humility to admit that I'm already senior, and I have a senior citizen card. But nonetheless, I just want to say that without surrendering idealism, the 1935 Constitution was a race to become who would become the first president of the Republic or the Commonwealth. You will recall that, of course. And that was between President Quezon and others. And then, of course, afterwards, the 1971 Constitution was the intervention of Mr. Marcos. And then, of course, the 1986 Constitution was, you know, a response to the possibility of having a revolutionary government. And so, therefore, we forsook the fact that we should elect delegates to that Constitutional Commission. In fact, they were all appointed by President Aquino. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Mr. President, and I believe that our generation also appreciates the 1987 Constitution as a people power constitution, a response to the trauma of the martial law dictatorship, and an attempt to enshrine these idealism of people power, of human rights in the basic law of the land. And I think one interesting addition to that process was that during the education campaign that followed the drafting of the draft, leading up to the ratification, malawak at marami yung mga konsultasyon sa maraming basic sectors at maraming mga mamamayan ang nakalahok, which is still one of the most attractive features for me of a possible CONCON process over and above others.
Thank you, thank you, the lady from Bicol. But I would like just to say for the record that, Mr. President, I was one of those who opposed that Constitution. I campaigned against it, and I believe the father of Rene Cayetano was with us, Senate President Enrile at that time was with us, Senator Tatad was with us, and we campaigned against that Constitution all over the country. For the simple reason that we thought that it, going directly to the people in a plebiscite, especially of the Constitution, which is very verbose and has a lot of words in it, I don't think I will be fair to our people if they cannot comprehend it. I'd like to think that they can comprehend it, but reeling from the recent experience of Britain on Brexit, one question, remain or leave, you can imagine what has happened to Britain since then. Now they're thinking of having another plebiscite because direct democracy isn't exactly the best form of consultation at times. And so when you have a constitution, I favor personally that we amend the Constitution and we go by what the American Constitution did, by having First Amendments, Second Amendment, Third Amendment that would be subject to debate. It may be costly to a certain extent, but nonetheless people would own the Constitution. They would respect it because they would understand it. But as you can see, many of the problems, and that's why the Constitution is now being debated on, is because in 1986 we were reacting. It was a knee-jerk response. I am not ready to concede, however, that Mr. Marcos widely intervened and created that famous provision that all acts of the present government, meaning martial law, would be declared constitutional and not unconstitutional. That to me was the most objectionable part. But the rest of the Constitution in 1971, I thought, merited very, very good response. It was unicameral, you had a presidential, which I think was what our current president was referring to I mean, this is not a new idea. The French presidency and the Parliament of France, although it is not federal, and I'm sorry I have to say that, Senate President Dillon, when I were discussing it earlier, Winnie Monson in his column the other day said so much. I think that in his remarks, which are more or less extemporaneous, I guess without benefit of further research, it was mistakenly referred to as a federal system. It was not. And that is why it's important for us to really tarry a little and discuss this at every opportunity, that the Constitution is not a document that we can say, all right, raise your hands as in 1971, or appoint the delegates and then, you know, go to the pretense of going around the country. It is not going to be absorbed readily by the country unless we give it the time and the respect so that people will not have second thoughts, as we are doing again at this time, saying that we should go to a presidential parliament, federal, which is not, or for that matter, you might go into federal and proceed to dismembering the country without realizing that there will be taxes in the federal state, there will be taxes in the states' governments, and there will also be things like, who owns the natural resources, do we share in education? I mean, these are things that are worthy of debate, that our people must be able to learn from these debates, and that when we present it to them, it must be done on a piece-by-piece basis, so that we should have, under this, and I'm glad that you're here, and many of us here are, are understanding of the fact that before we even make that presentation, we probably should have a caucus, Mr. President, on what are the baselines for the Constitution that is going to be amended before we even go into form. Before we even say parliamentary, or we even say presidential or federal, there must be baselines set by the Senate, because we are perhaps the more senior house to a certain extent, because we're elected nationally, and so that we can more or less set a guide that these are the following things that we should propose, that we should talk about, so that people would know what they're getting into before we get into the very delicate and very difficult, and I'm not afraid of difficult, I think we can handle it, delicate nonetheless, very important, not just for posterity, but for the safety and security of our country and the matter of constitutional change. So my concern, I'd like to express here to the gentle lady, and I hope she'll be supportive of that fact. Would the gentle lady be supportive of that fact?
I'm sorry, Mr. President, of which fact? Although there were at least two reflections that came to my mind with the recent input of the good Senator Gordon, one being that the 1987 Constitution is not just a reaction to the trauma of the martial law dictatorship, but it also tried to enshrine our aspirations to return to a democratization process and to broaden the political change that happened with the EDSA People Power Revolution, and to deepen it, to go from mere political change to economic and social change as well. And then, Mr. President, medyo iba naman ang Brexit sa hinaharap natin ngayon. O, nakakalula yung nagawa nila doon. But, well, aside from the fact that they didn't change or they didn't throw out their Magna Carta, but they don't have a written modern constitution in the UK, iba naman yung EU sa kanila kumpara sa home archipelago nila.
Nonetheless, Mr. Chairman, it's very, very important. In fact, they are visibly divided. The pound has gone down. Their economy is very insecure, very uneven keel right now. And I'm not going to judge the choices of my good colleague here, but I can also say that we have tended to contradict ourselves. When we say, for example, and just by example, at the risk of striking a debate, and if we are going to have a debate, since there's not much on the agenda yet, we're just in the beginning of formation of the committees, in as much as we have time, and I hope I will not infringe on the patience of our colleagues here, just for debate purposes. For example, the matter of foreign military bases, troops, or facilities shall not be allowed in Philippine territory except under a treaty duly concurred in by the other country, and duly concurred in by a plebiscite. We did not go through that. We have EDCA. Of course, the Supreme Court has already judged that it was legitimate, but nonetheless, these are questions that remain, that you cannot just tie the hands of our country in terms of flexibility. The argument I used to make was, and that's one of the reasons why I argued against it, for national security purposes. Supposing China attacks us, are we going to say, time out, we have to amend the Constitution, we have to have it ratified by the other contracting party to allow troops to come here, and we have to have it ratified in a plebiscite? That would really be unwieldy. But of course, when push comes to shove, we will have to do other things. So I just thought I'd fan the flames of inquisition or thinking by asking these questions, and I hope the gentle lady doesn't mind.
Not at all, Mr. President. I really appreciate these exchanges, although the word inquisition sends shivers up my spine. Since
Well,
but the last point that I
having a
want...
Spanish background, yes.
And the last point that I wanted to make earlier, Mr. President, was that precisely the kinds of discussions, education, and information campaigns that the good Senator Gordon mentioned earlier in relation to an earlier constitutional reform exercise, those are precisely the kinds of people's participation that I look forward to as we consider the possibility of CON-CON as a mode of constitutional reform.
Kaya nga ho, nakakatakot yung CON-CON eh. Sabi nga ng CON-CON, fool me once, shame on you. Another con, fool me twice, shame on me. Kaya CON-CON, nakakatakot siya. So I'm just playing on words, but nonetheless, they can also say the same thing about con-ass. And there are many, back portions of the body here in both Congresses, and they could pull around with that as well. But to me, the point that I just raised here is so that we would tarry a little and consider all these matters. And I'm glad the gentle lady opened it up right away so we can have some preliminary discourses on this matter, which is of vital importance to our country. I'd like to thank the Chair, the Presidency, for allowing me to be able to ask questions of this lovely lady dressed in white, and from Panay and Cavite, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Gordon.
President.
Majority Leader.
Yes, for a while there, I was in a quandary on where to refer the speech of the distinguished lady, because the speech covered a number of topics. So it mentioned about universal health, about social justice, accountability, preservation of human rights. So I decided to move to refer it to the Committee on Rules.
There is a motion to refer the privileged speech of Senator Ontiveros to the Committee on Rules.
Well, the lady is requesting that we refer it to the Committee on Health. I have no objection, Mr. President. As I said, I
will now
speaking
restate the pending motion. There is a motion to refer the privileged speech of Senator Ontiveros to the Committee on Health. Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the consent of the Chamber, and this is allowed in Section 63 of our rules, I move for the consideration of PS Resolution 68. This is a resolution that will amend Section 13, Rule 10 of the Senate Rules by dividing two standing committees into one standing committee into two separate standing committees, Mr. President. So with the consent of the Chamber, I move to consider Senate Resolution 68.
There is a motion to consider proposed Senate Resolution number 68. Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. We proceed to consider proposed Senate Resolution number 68.
Mr. President, I move that the Secretary read the title of the measure. And we may distribute copies of the resolution to the other members of the Senate.
Resolution amending Section 1335, Rule 10 of the Senate Rules by dividing into two separate standing committees, the Committee on Games, Amusement, and Sports.
Thank you. Mr. President, as I manifested earlier, this is a resolution that will amend Section 1335, Rule 10 of the Senate Rules by dividing into two separate standing committees, Committee on Games and Amusements and Sports. There will be 9 members for the Committee on Games, and there will be 9 members for the Committee on Sports. The former chairman of this committee, not only in the 15th Congress, 16th Congress, but also in the 15th Congress, have said that there are really very two different aspects that are being discussed in this committee. So it is best that we really divide it into two. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we adopt the Senate Resolution 68.
There is a motion to adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 68, which divides the existing Committee on Games, Amusement, and Sports into two committees: Committee on Games, Amusement, and Committee on Games and Amusement, and Committee on Amateur Sport Competitiveness. Any objection? Senator Gordon is recognized.
I do not intend to object, Your Honor, but I just want to have a cautionary observation. Because once we start splitting committees here, with all due respect to my esteemed colleague, we can, for example, say transportation and ports will be separated. I just don't want it to become a precedent, Mr. Chairman, because I remember the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Laws, and Electoral Reforms was one committee. When I got back here, I found out it was already split, and I was wondering whether we have too many committees that we have to attend to. But I will bow by the wisdom of my good friend Senator Soto so that we could proceed, but just a cautionary advice, if you will take it from this representation, that we should not try to make this a precedent, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gordon, for that discussion. So shall we proceed with the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. With the assurance that I will give the distinguished gentleman from Zambales, Senator Gordon, that whatever, at the moment, this is the only committee that we intend to break into two because of the two different issues that are being tackled by the committee. And if ever we need to discuss anything, we will surely bring it into caucus like what we did at the start of the 17th Congress. We give that assurance, Mr. President.
So there is a pending motion. Any objection? There being none, the motion to approve proposed Senate Resolution number 68 is hereby approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last Tuesday, we already started electing the chairs and the members of the various standing committees of the Senate. With the permission of the body, I move that we continue with the organization of the various standing committees. So move, Mr. President.
There's a motion to continue with the constitution of our standing committees. Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Majority Leader?
We have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension. Dali, basahin.
Ready to resume, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Mr. President, I move to reconsider Senate Resolution 68.
There is a motion to reconsider Senate Resolution number 68. Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. There was a glitch in the resolution, so I move that we open the period of amendment.
So we now go to there's a motion to open the period of amendments for proposed Senate Resolution number 68. Is there any objection? There being none, period of amendments is open.
Thank you. Mr. President, in the resolutory portion, in the second to the last paragraph of the resolution, as is mirrored in your copies, number 35, Committee on Games and Amusements, 9 words and numbers, members, all matters relating to games and amusement, such as lotteries, high alay, horse racing, period. I so move, Mr. President.
There is a motion to amend paragraph 35 found in proposed Senate Resolution number 68 as read by the Majority Leader. Any objection? There being none, the motion is hereby approved.
And then the second amendment, Mr. President, would be the continuing paragraph. And it shall read now as number 36, Committee on Amateur Sports Competitiveness, 9 in words and numbers, members, all matters relating to the promotion of physical fitness, wrestling, boxing, basketball, and all other professional sports, and amateur, grassroots, and elite sports development, period.
Majority Leader, can we also amend the title?
Also, yes, the title.
The name of the committee.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. President. Remove the word amateur. Committee on Sports Competitiveness. Or Committee on Sports.
Yes, sir. So can we read again, sir,
I'll restate it.
the resulting paragraph after amendment?
Okay, to restate, Mr. President. Number 36, Committee on Sports, 9 members, 9 words and numbers, all matters relating to the promotion of physical fitness, wrestling, boxing, basketball, and all other professional sports, and amateur, grassroots, and elite sports development. So move, Mr. President.
There is a motion to amend that paragraph 36 appearing on proposed Senate Resolution number 68. Any objection? Senator Drilon?
For the record, how does 35 now read?
As proposed in the amended version earlier, it will now read number 35, Committee on Games and Amusement, 9 members, all matters relating to games and amusement, such as lotteries, high alay, and horse racing, period.
Okay. And 36 will now read if the...
Committee on Sports, 9 members, all matters relating to the promotion of physical fitness, wrestling, boxing, basketball. We can remove the word.
Why do we have to specify the specific sports, Mr. President? I think that's the question that I'm raising. Why can we not just say all matters relating to the promotion of physical fitness and
Physical fitness, professional and amateur sports. I accept, Mr. President. Accepted. Sports development. Yes.
So can we-
may I read it now, Mr.
Can we now
President?
restate the final
Yeah,
version?
as amended. Committee on Sports, 9 members. All matters relating to the promotion of physical fitness, professional sports, professional and amateur sports development. Professional and amateur sports development.
There is a motion to amend paragraph 36, creating the Committee on Sports found in proposed Senate Resolution number 68, as stated by the Majority Leader. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
I now move that we adopt Senate Resolution 68 as amended, Mr. President.
There is a motion to adopt Senate Resolution number 68 as amended. Any objection? There being none, Senate Resolution number 68 is hereby adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now reiterate my motion to continue the organization of the various standing committees, Mr. President.
Any objection to proceed with the reorganization of our committees? The hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, for the Committee on Government Organization, GOCCs, Mr. President, I move that we elect Senator Richard Gordon as chairman, Francis Pangilinan vice chairman, members Subiri, Hontiveros, Villanueva, Binay, Villar, and Pacquiao for the majority. For the minority, Senator Escudero, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises with Senator Gordon as chairman and the other senators named therein as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the committee is so constituted.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we constitute the Committee on Science and Technology. Senator Bam Aquino as chair. Members Senator Angara, Ejercito, Villar, Pangilinan, Subiri for the majority. And for the minority, Senator Trillanes. So move, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Science and Technology with Senator Aquino as the chair and the other senators named as members. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Science and Technology is hereby constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we constitute the Committee on Climate Change with Senator Loren Legarda as chair, Vice Chair Senator Mig Subiri, members Senator Aquino, Hontiveros, Villar, Binay, Honasan, and for the minority, Escudero and Trillanes, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Climate Change with Senator Legarda as the chairperson and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Climate Change is hereby constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the Committee on Games and Amusement, I move to constitute the committee with Senator Pampilo Lacson as chairman, Vice Chair Senator Hontiveros, members Ejercito, Legarda, Onasan, Pacquiao, Binay, Gordon, and for the minority, Senator Escudero, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Games and Amusement with Senator Lacson as the chairperson and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Games and Amusement is hereby constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we constitute the Committee on Sports with Senator Manny Pacquiao as chairman, members Senator Honasan, Angara, Lacson, Villanueva, Ejercito, Gatchalian, Mig Subiri, and Senator Trillanes for the minority, Mr.
There
President.
is a motion to constitute the Committee on Sports with Senator Pacquiao as the chairman and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Sports is so constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to constitute the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies. The chair, Senator Escudero. Members, Senator Binay, Aquino, Lacson, Honasan, Po, Gatchalian, Villanueva. And for the minority, Senator Trillanes.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies to be chaired by Senator Francis Escudero and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions and Currencies is hereby so constituted.
Mr. President, I move that we constitute the Committee on Youth. Senator Joel Villanueva as chair, vice chair Senator Bam Aquino, members Angara, Pacquiao, Binay, Ejercito, and for the minority, the youngest in the minority is the Senator Recto, Mr. President, but he's not qualified because he's ex officio. He's ex officio. So, sino? Trillanes, Mr. President, the oldest.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Youth with Senator Villanueva as the chairman and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Youth is hereby so constituted.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we constitute the Committee on Economic Affairs. Senator Win Gatchalian as chairman, Senators Zubiri and Villanueva as vice chairman, members Ejercito, Gordon, Pangilinan, and Binay, and Senators Trillanes and Escudero as members.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Economic Affairs with Senator Gatchalian as the chairman and the other senators named as either vice chair or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Economic Affairs is hereby so constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we constitute the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation with Senator Laila de Lima as chair and Senator Richard Gordon as vice chair, members Pangilinan, Hontiveros, Legarda, Pacquiao, Po, Aquino, Villar. For the minority, Senator Escudero and Trillanes, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation with Senator De Lima as the chairperson and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation is hereby so constituted. Majority Leader.
I see no other member presenting a motion at this point, Mr. President. So I may have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Minute suspension.
We ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, it grieves my heart to admit that there is another mistake in our resolution earlier. So I move to reconsider Senate Resolution 68.
So I will use the own words of the Majority Leader. We will consider the walang kamatayang Senate Resolution number 68. Any
Mr.
objection?
President.
Yes, sir. Minority Leader.
I don't know if I should, a point of order, Mr. President. How many times should we be amending this resolution?
There is no limit. There is no limit, Mr. President.
No, I'd like
Based
to
on the-
find out, Mr. President, when did the majority decide on this resolution? Just today, yesterday?
I don't
a
know,
week
Mr.
ago?
President, we decided on it during the caucus.
During the caucus.
During the caucus.
And not all the details were. Next time you invite the minority so that there's only possibly one amendment to the resolution.
Well, the real problem, Mr. President, is that we just copied the old composition of the Games and Amusements and Sports Committee and divided it into two. That was the mistake. And right now there are certain words that are missing that would encompass what really
Again, just
we
a
would want to
reminder.
cover.
Just a reminder, Mr. President, next time in a caucus, maybe you can
Invite
have
the
an
minority.
all-senators caucus and invite the members of the minority so we can participate in crafting
Yes.
the resolution properly.
I agree,
Thank you, Mr. President.
I agree, Mr. President, but unfortunately, during the time that we called the caucus, the minority was still members of the majority at that time. So we did not know who were the minority during that meeting. But nevertheless, we will take into consideration and take note of the manifestation of the minority leader. Thank you, Mr. President. May we
So,
recognize Senator
is
Dilo?
there any objection to consider again?
Yeah, reconsider.
To Senate Resolution number 68. There being no objection, consideration of the said measure is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, just to answer again the question of the minority leader, we may reconsider a bill even after 3 days, maximum of 3 days. Any measure that we have passed or any motion that we have passed, Mr. President, for the record. Okay, Mr. President, I move again that we open the period of amendment on Senate Resolution 68.
Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, we are back to the period of amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the, well, levity aside first. On number 35 again, the second to the last paragraph on page 2. Committee on Games and Amusements, 9 members. The amendment will read, all matters relating to games and amusement, but not limited to, such as, but not limited to, casinos, lotteries, high alay, horse racing, period, and horse racing, period.
There's a motion to amend proposed Senate Resolution number 68, paragraph 35, defining or enumerating the jurisdiction of the Committee on Games and Amusement. Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move to adopt
Which one?
only Resolution 68.
Before we adopt, Majority Leader, the numbering, should we not pay attention to the numbering also?
The numbering,
Because
Mr. President.
we are amending Section 13 of our rules, and there is already a paragraph 36.
Huh? The motion is, Mr. President, as mentored by the former Senate President, subject to style. I move that we
Okay.
adopt only Senate Resolution 68, subject to style. so that
Subject
we
with
may
the
renumber.
understanding that subject to style, the phrase subject to style includes the renumbering
Yes.
of the original section, Section 13, no?
Yes, and
Section 13 of our Senate rules.
yes, and periods and commas that we might have omitted. Mr.
Any
President.
objection to the motion to adopt amended, Senate Resolution number 68 as amended, subject to style, with,
Yes.
with that understanding. No objection, hearing none. The motion is approved, and Senate Resolution number 68 is approved as amended. Adopted as amended.
There is a
Majority
prediction.
Leader?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. There is a prediction of the Minority Leader that we might take it up again. Precisely because it is entitled Amusement, Committee on Amusement, Mr. President. So, at this point, Mr. President, I move that we elect and compose the Committee on Cooperatives with Senator Mick Subiri as chair, Senator Hontiveros as vice chair, members Gordon, Villar, Angara, Legarda, Pacquiao, Villanueva, Escudero for the minority, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Cooperatives with Senator Subiri as the chairman and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Cooperatives is so constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we constitute the Committee on Local Government. 13 members. Senator Sani Angara as chairman, vice chair Senator Hontiveros, members Honasan, Ejercito, Villanueva, Aquino, Villar, Subiri, Gatchalian, Legarda, Binay, and for the minority, Escudero and Trillanes, Mr. President.
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Local Government with Senator Subiri as the chairman and the other senators named as either vice chairman or members thereof. Any with Senator Angara as chairman of the Committee on Local Government and the other senators named as vice chairman or members thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Local Government is so constituted with Senator Angara as the chairman.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Majority Leader.
Yes, Senator Angara.
Why is the Senate President always thinking of the gentleman from Bukidnon?
Because, Mr. President, they have a past.
I'm satisfied, Mr. Majority Leader. Mr. President.
Mr. President, I was given a copy of Senator Poe of the Committee on Public Info, but it is over by one member. No, unless, no. No, it includes the minority already, Mr. President. I beg your indulgence. I move that we constitute the Committee on Public Information Mass Media with Senator Poe as chairman, members De Lima, Honasan, Hontiveros.
Choose one ka lang.
Ano ba yung kanina?
Public info.
Again, De Lima, Honasan, Hontiveros, Gordon, Escudero, JB, Ejercito, Pangilinan, and Legarda, Mr. President.
9 members.
Yes,
There is a motion to constitute the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media with Senator Poe as the chairperson thereof and the other senators named as members. Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved and the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media is so constituted.
Thank you, Mr. President. There being no other business, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock, August 2, Tuesday, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
There is a motion to adjourn. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, August 2, 2016.